Shayla Jackson never imagined that Barron Trump, the youngest son of a former president, would walk into her life and turn it upside down in the most astonishing way possible. It was a quiet Tuesday night in Washington, D.C., a city where power pulsed through every street corner and whispered secrets clung to the air like humidity. Something incredible was about to happen, something so mind-blowing, so hilariously unexpected, that it would become the greatest story Shayla would ever tell. But in that moment, she didn't know it yet. All she felt were the aching soles of her feet, the weight of exhaustion pressing down after 5 years of waitressing at La Petite Bistro, an upscale restaurant where crystal chandeliers glimmered like stars she could never reach. She was a single mother, a woman of resilience shaped by her mama's golden rule. Kindness costs nothing, but its worth is beyond measure. That night, though, kindness would cost her everything, or so it seemed. Shayla moved through the restaurant with the grace of someone who'd memorized every squeak in the polished wooden floors. The photo of her daughter, Maya, tucked into her apron pocket, was her anchor. One glance at that gap-toothed smile reminded her why she pushed through endless shifts, why she'd taken this extra night despite her body begging for rest. Maya's 8th grade class was planning a trip to New York City, a dream shimmering just out of reach. Every tip, every extra hour was a step closer to making it real. The restaurant was quieter than usual, its usual crowd of lawyers in tailored suits and politicians hiding behind fake smiles having dwindled to a handful of late diners. Shayla wiped down a table near the window, the glass cool against her fingertips, when the bell above the door chimed, a soft, almost hesitant sound. A teenage boy stepped inside, tall and lanky, his frame swallowed by a gray hoodie and jeans that looked carelessly thrown on. A baseball cap shadowed his face, pulled low as if he wanted to disappear into the fabric. His shoulders slumped, his hands fidgeting. He scanned the room like a deer caught in headlights. Shayla noticed it immediately, the same defeated posture Maya wore after a bad day at school. Something tugged at her heart, a quiet instinct honed by years of motherhood. She grabbed a menu, her voice warm and steady as she approached him. The boy nodded when she offered a table for one, his eyes avoiding hers, and she led him to a corner booth where the light was soft and the world felt a little less harsh. As she handed him the menu, a sliver of his face caught the light. Her breath hitched. Living in D.C., famous faces were as common as cherry blossoms in spring, but this one stood out: Barron Trump. The name flashed in her mind like a headline, bold and unmistakable. Yet the boy before her wasn't the polished figure from news clips. He was just a kid, lost in his own storm. Shayla's mama had taught her to see people, not titles, and that wisdom guided her now. She didn't gasp or gawk. Instead, she treated him like any other customer, her tone casual as she asked what he'd like to drink. His mumbled request for water came out shaky, barely audible, and when she returned with the glass, she saw him swipe at his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. Without a word, she set an extra napkin beside his water, her movements deliberate but gentle, pretending not to notice the tears he tried to hide. Her mama's voice echoed in her mind. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let someone keep their dignity. She mentioned the chocolate cake, calling it a cure for rough days, and a faint smile flickered across his face, small but real. It was a crack in the wall he'd built around himself, and Shayla felt a quiet victory in that. As the night wore on, she kept an eye on him while weaving between her other tables. He ordered spaghetti and meatballs, the simplest dish on the menu, and ate slowly as if savoring the calm. His phone buzzed constantly, each glance at the screen deepening the worry etched into his brow. Shayla wondered if someone was looking for him. Security, family, someone powerful, but she didn't pry. That wasn't her way. When the bill came, trouble stirred. He handed her a crumpled $10 bill, his hands trembling as he admitted it was all he had. The meal cost more, but before Shayla could say anything, her manager, Mr. Peterson, appeared like a vulture sensing weakness. His sharp eyes narrowed, his voice dripping with suspicion as he demanded to know why the boy couldn't pay. The teenager shrank into his seat, his cap slipping lower, and Shayla stepped in. She pulled out her own cash, tips meant for Maya's trip, and covered the difference, her voice firm as she told Mr. Peterson it was handled. The manager's gaze lingered, cold and calculating, but he walked away without a word. The boy looked up at Shayla, his eyes wide with something like awe. She smiled, soft and steady, and told him to get home safe. As he slipped out into the night, his silhouette swallowed by the dark DC streets, she whispered a prayer for him, unaware that her life was about to unravel. Back in the kitchen, Mr. Peterson's demeanor shifted. He cornered Shayla, his tone icy as he accused her of something unthinkable, stealing from the register to cover the boy's meal. It was a lie, a vicious fabrication born from his own paranoia about high-profile guests and restaurant liability. Shayla protested, her heart pounding, but he wouldn't listen. She crossed a line, he said, and her kindness had put them all at risk. The accusation stung deeper than anything she'd ever felt, a betrayal from a man she'd worked beside for years. As she left that night, her tips lighter and her spirit bruised, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing. The metro ride home was a blur, the city lights streaking past like tears she refused to shed. She thought of Maya, asleep on the couch with a plate of burnt cookies waiting, and clung to that image like a lifeline. Little did she know, the world was about to turn upside down, and the boy she'd helped was watching it all. The morning after Shayla Jackson's quiet act of kindness, the world she knew began to crumble in ways she never could have predicted. She woke early, the scent of cinnamon and French toast filling their small apartment as she hummed her mama's old gospel tunes, songs that had carried her through every storm life had thrown her way. Maya sat at the kitchen table, her hair still messy from sleep, her eyes bright with the innocence of youth. Shayla slid a plate in front of her daughter, the golden toast a small luxury in their frugal life, and felt a swell of gratitude for the simple things, their home, their bond, the dream of that New York trip still flickering on the horizon. She didn't mention the boy from the night before, didn't tell Maya how she dipped into their savings to cover his meal, or how Mr. Peterson's accusation had left a bitter taste no amount of coffee could wash away. Some burdens were hers alone to carry. Dropping Maya off at school, Shayla felt the weight of the previous night settle deeper into her bones. Her feet still ached from the long shift, and her mind churned with worry about the money she'd spent, money meant for Maya's future. She headed to the bank, determined to shuffle funds from her emergency stash to keep their budget afloat. The TV in the lobby flickered with breaking news, the volume low but the images stark. Barron Trump missing for 3 hours, Secret Service silent. Shayla's stomach twisted, a cold knot forming as she recognized the timeline. The boy in her section, the one she'd fed and shielded, had been the missing piece in a citywide search. She kept her head down, focusing on her deposit slip, but the realization sank in. He wasn't just a troubled kid. He was the former president's son, a figure cloaked in privilege and scrutiny, and she'd stepped into his world without even knowing it. Her phone buzzed as she left the bank, a message from Mr. Peterson cutting through the morning haze. "Come in early, we need to talk." The words were clipped, ominous, and Shayla's pulse quickened. In 5 years at La Petite Bistro, she'd never been summoned like this. She straightened her shoulders, channeling her mama's unyielding strength, and made her way to the restaurant. The morning light cast long shadows across the empty dining room, the chandeliers dull without their nighttime sparkle. Mr. Peterson waited in his office, his face pale, his eyes avoiding hers. 2 men in dark suits flanked him, their presence heavy and official, like statues carved from suspicion. Security footage played on a tablet one of them held, grainy images of Shayla serving Barron, bringing him water, slipping her own money into the till. Her heart thudded as the scene unfolded, every moment of kindness now twisted into something sinister. The accusations came fast and sharp. Mr. Peterson claimed she'd endangered the restaurant by not reporting a high-risk individual. The men in suits called it a breach of protocol, their voices cold as they detailed how the Secret Service had scoured the city while Barron sat in her booth. Shayla's voice trembled but held firm as she explained. She'd seen a young man in need, not a political figure, and treated him with the respect every person deserved. Mr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably, his hands shuffling papers before delivering the blow. Her job was gone, effective immediately. 5 years of sweat, of late nights, of balancing trays and motherhood, erased because she dared to be kind. The betrayal stung worse than the firing itself. His lie about theft, his refusal to see her side, cut deep into the trust she'd once had. Shayla unpinned her name tag with shaking fingers, the plastic clattering onto the desk beside her folded apron. She reached into the pocket for Maya's photo, her one tether to sanity, and clutched it as she walked out. The men in suits warned her to stay silent. National security, they said, as if her small act of decency threatened the nation. She almost laughed at the absurdity, but the weight of it all kept her quiet. Outside, the sun warmed her face, a stark contrast to the chill settling in her chest. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a news alert. Mystery waitress caught harboring first son. The blurry footage was everywhere, her face just recognizable enough to spark a firestorm. Comments flooded in, some hailed her as a hero, others branded her a fool or worse. She whispered her mama's prayer, "Lord, give me strength," as she boarded the metro, the city blurring past her once more. By the time she reached her apartment, the chaos had erupted. Mrs. Rodriguez, her neighbor, stood outside clutching a newspaper, her eyes wide with worry. Shayla's image stared back from the front page, the headline screaming about Secret Service breaches and silent guardians. Inside, her phone lit up with notifications, missed calls, messages from strangers, friend requests from people she'd never met. Maya burst through the door soon after, her backpack thudding to the floor, her voice breathless as she recounted how the school buzzed with gossip. Videos were circulating, dissecting Shayla's every move, turning a simple night into a spectacle. She pulled Maya close, stroking her hair, and explained that kindness didn't need a spotlight, it just needed to be real. But the truth stayed locked inside her. She wouldn't drag her daughter into the storm. News vans parked outside their building, reporters shouting questions as neighbors peeked from windows. Mrs. Rodriguez brought enchiladas and stood guard, shooing away intruders with a fierceness Shayla adored. An old friend, Teresa, now a journalist, begged for her story, but Shayla refused. Some truths weren't hers to sell. As night fell, she sat in the dark, watching the glow of headlights through the curtains. Her phone showed dozens of missed calls, but one message stood out, a private note from Trump. She didn't open it, not yet. Tomorrow loomed with uncertainty, bills, rent, Maya's trip, all now teetering on the edge. But somewhere in a grand white house across the city, a boy was writing a letter, and in another office, a powerful figure was plotting a twist that would make this firing the least of Shayla's worries. Shayla Jackson's life had become a battlefield she never signed up to fight. A week had passed since that fateful night at La Petite Bistro, and the storm showed no signs of easing. The news vans had thinned, but photographers lingered like vultures on street corners, their lenses glinting in the morning sun. She applied to 12 restaurants, her resume polished with years of experience, but every interview ended the same way: a polite smile, a vague promise to call, and silence. Her name was poison now, tied to a scandal that painted her as both saint and sinner. The bills stacked up on the kitchen table, a towering reminder of rent due, groceries needed, and a New York trip slipping further from Maya's grasp. Yet Shayla held her head high, her mama's strength coursing through her veins, refusing to let the world see her break. Mornings became a ritual of resilience. She'd wake before dawn, brew coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and cook breakfast for Maya, pancakes one day, oatmeal the next, anything to keep normalcy alive. Maya noticed the strain, her sharp eyes catching the way Shayla's hands lingered over the nearly empty New York trip jar. She didn't ask, though not yet. She inherited her mother's quiet pride, her ability to sense when to wait. Instead, she'd chatter about school, about friends dissecting the viral footage, turning Shayla into a myth. Some called her a spy, others an angel. Shayla laughed it off, but the weight of it pressed harder each day. Her phone stayed mostly off now, the barrage of notifications too much to bear, though that unopened message from Trump lingered in her mind like a shadow she couldn't shake. The apartment became a sanctuary and a prison. Mrs. Rodriguez brought groceries one day, her arthritis-swollen hands trembling as she insisted it was nothing. Mr. Chen from the corner store dropped off a bag of fruit, his gruff voice softening as he waved off payment. The neighborhood rallied around her, a quiet army of kindness that mirrored what she'd always given. But it wasn't enough, not yet. Shayla spent nights updating her resume, scouring job listings, her eyes burning from the screen's glow. Sleep eluded her, replaced by visions of Maya's disappointed face when the trip fell through. She'd whisper her mama's prayer into the darkness. "Lord, help me be the person my daughter believes I am," and cling to the hope that something, anything, would shift. That shift came on a crisp afternoon when Maya burst through the door, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She waved a cream-colored envelope, its thick paper gleaming like a treasure. The mailman had handed it to her personally, she said, his eyes twinkling as if he knew its worth. Shayla's fingers traced her name written in elegant script, no return address to hint at its sender. She opened it, her breath catching as she saw the letterhead. The Windsor Hotel, DC's crown jewel where presidents dined and dignitaries whispered deals. The letter was short but stunning, an offer to become their lead restaurant hostess, with a salary that dwarfed her old wages and benefits she'd never dreamed of. Her hands shook as she read it again, the words blurring through sudden tears. Maya peeked over her shoulder, her gasp echoing Shayla's disbelief. Before she could explain, the doorbell rang. Tommy, their mailman, stood there with another envelope, this one plain white but heavy with urgency. He needed her signature, he said, his voice apologetic yet curious. Shayla sent Maya to her room with a gentle nudge, promising answers soon, and unfolded the second letter alone. The handwriting was young, slightly messy, as if penned in a hurry. It began with her name, Dear Miss Jackson, and poured out a story that stole her breath. The boy from that night, Barron Trump, wrote of his gratitude, his words raw and earnest. He'd been drowning in a bad day, he said, suffocated by eyes that saw him only as a symbol, not a person. Shayla had seen him, truly seen him, and that small act had shifted something inside him. He knew she'd lost her job because of him, knew the media had twisted her kindness into chaos, and it gnawed at him. Tucked inside the envelope was a check, its amount staggering, enough for Maya's trip and months of rent beyond that. It wasn't from his parents or some government fund, he insisted, but from his own savings, a gesture of amends. He mentioned his mother, too, Melania Trump, saying she'd been moved by Shayla's actions and had orchestrated the Windsor offer. There was more, he hinted, plans she'd want to discuss in person, but this was the start. Shayla's tears stained the paper as she read his postscript, an apology from his security team for the fallout at the restaurant. Her phone buzzed, the B-Trump account alive again with a new message. "Did you get the letters? Mom wants to meet for coffee, just us, no circus. Your call." She sat there, the weight of it all sinking in, her mind reeling with possibilities. The Windsor job felt like a dream, Barron's letter a lifeline, and the prospect of meeting Melania a step into the unknown. She didn't tell Maya, not yet. Instead, she helped her daughter with math homework, her voice steady even as her thoughts raced. Later, alone in the quiet, she typed a reply. "Got the letters. Coffee sounds nice. And thank you for seeing kindness matters. Your mom raised a good man." She hit send, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and hope. The next morning, she'd tell Maya the trip was back on, but the bigger story, the restaurant dreams, the meetings with power, would wait. For now, she hugged her daughter tight, the envelope hidden in a drawer, its promise glowing like an ember in the dark. Shayla's first day at the Windsor was a revelation. The lobby gleamed with marble and gold, the air thick with prestige, but it was the respect in the manager's handshake that struck her deepest. Her new uniform fit like it was made for her, the brass name tag catching the light as she learned the ropes. Every guest was a VIP, but more, she saw them as people, just like she always had. Maya noticed the change, too, breakfasts together, lighter shadows under Shayla's eyes, a hum in her voice that echoed her mama's joy. The ripple of that Tuesday night was spreading, and though Shayla couldn't see the full shore yet, she felt the tide pulling her towards something extraordinary. Shayla Jackson stood on the edge of a new chapter, her feet planted in the gleaming marble lobby of the Windsor Hotel, a place so grand it felt like stepping into a dream she'd never dared to dream. The air hummed with the quiet bustle of wealth, bellhops gliding past with polished brass carts, guests in tailored suits murmuring into phones, the faint clink of crystal glasses echoing from the restaurant down the hall. It was her first week as lead hostess, and the weight of her brass name tag felt like a medal earned through years of grit and grace. She traded the scratchy polyester of La Petite Bistro for a tailored uniform that hugged her frame like a second skin, its deep blue fabric catching the light of the chandeliers overhead. But it wasn't the luxury that struck her deepest. It was the way people looked at her here, with respect, with expectation, as if she belonged. After a week of being vilified online and discarded by her old boss, that alone felt like a miracle. The Windsor wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. The salary dwarfed what she'd earned at La Petite Bistro, enough to cover rent, groceries, and Maya's New York trip without the constant scramble that had defined their lives for so long. Benefits came too: health insurance, something she'd gone without for years, a safety net for the cough that sometimes rattled her chest after long shifts. She spent her first day shadowing the manager, Ms. Chen, a woman with a sharp mind and a warm smile who'd welcomed her like family. Ms. Chen had heard the story everyone had by now, and instead of shying away, she'd leaned in, telling Shayla they needed someone with her heart on their team. Kindness over protocol, she'd said, her eyes twinkling as if she knew more than she let on. Shayla learned the Windsor way fast. Every guest was a VIP, but more than that, every guest was a person, a truth she'd lived by long before stepping through these doors. Mornings at home shifted too, the rhythm of their small apartment softening with the promise of stability. Shayla woke early, the pre-dawn quiet wrapping around her like a blanket as she brewed coffee and flipped pancakes on their chip stovetop. Maya would shuffle in, her hair a wild halo, her voice still thick with sleep as she teased her mom about humming again. "You sound like Grandma," she'd say, and Shayla would smile, remembering her mama's kitchen, the way those gospel songs could lift even the heaviest days. They'd eat together now, no rushed goodbyes or skipped meals, the dark circles under Shayla's eyes fatting with every bite of normalcy. Maya noticed it all: the extra time, the lighter steps, the way her mom's shoulders didn't slump anymore. She didn't ask about the money yet, didn't press about the Windsor job or the trip jar suddenly filling up, but her eyes held questions Shayla wasn't ready to answer. The coffee meeting with Melania Trump loomed like a shadow and a beacon all at once. Shayla had agreed to it, her fingers trembling as she typed her reply to Barron's message, but the reality of it hadn't sunk in until the day arrived. She chose a quiet spot, a small cafe tucked away on a side street, its windows fogged with the warmth of brewing espresso, its tables scattered with regulars who didn't care about headlines. She arrived early, her hands smoothing her coat over and over, her heart thudding with a mix of nerves and curiosity. What could the former First Lady want beyond the job offer? What did this elegant, enigmatic woman see in a waitress who'd just been trying to do right by a kid? The door chimed, and there she was, Melania Trump, tall and poised, her designer coat brushing the floor, her eyes sharp but soft as they found Shayla across the room. The meeting stretched into an hour, then two, the coffee cooling as words flowed between them. Melania spoke of Barron's night at La Petite Bistro, how Shayla's quiet kindness had cut through his isolation, a shield against a world that saw him only as a name. She watched the media storm unfold, seen Shayla's silence in the face of chaos, and admired it. "You didn't sell him out," she said, her voice low and steady, "and that's rare." Then came the twist. Melania had a vision, a project born from that night. She wanted to build something, a place where kindness wasn't just a gesture but a foundation. A restaurant, she proposed, where no one would be turned away hungry, where people like Shayla could thrive. She saw Shayla at its heart, not just as a worker, but as its soul, its manager, maybe even its owner one day. The words landed like a thunderclap, and Shayla sat there, stunned, her mind racing to catch up. Details spilled out over the next meetings, 3 in total, each more dizzying than the last. Melania brought sketches, business plans, names scribbled on napkins. "The kind table," she called it, her accent wrapping around the words like a promise. Shayla found herself pulled into late-night phone calls, poring over budgets and layouts on her rickety kitchen table after Maya slept. She met architects with crisp suits, donors with deep pockets, people whose names she'd only seen in bold print. They treated her like an equal, their voices eager as they asked her opinions on everything from menu ideas to seating plans. It was surreal, this leap from serving plates to shaping a dream, but Melania's faith in her was unshakable. "You see people," she'd say, "and that's a gift we can share." Back at the Windsor, Shayla's days grew richer. She greeted guests with a smile that came easier now, her voice steady as she guided them to tables. Regulars started recognizing her, some from the news, others from her quiet warmth, and tips flowed like they never had before. One man, a silver-haired lawyer with a booming laugh, left a $100 bill under his plate, whispering, "For that trip your girl's taking." Word had spread, and Shayla felt the city's eyes shifting, softening. But not everyone watched with kindness. Mr. Peterson, her old boss, simmered in the background, his name popping up in snide comments online, his restaurant's reputation sinking under boycotts and one-star reviews. She heard whispers he blamed her, that he was plotting something, a move to reclaim his dignity by dragging hers down again. The storm broke on a Friday, 6 weeks into her Windsor tenure. Maya came home from school, her backpack thudding to the floor, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and worry. "Mom, you're on TV again," she said, flipping on the news. There was Mr. Peterson, standing outside La Petite Bistro, his face flushed with indignation as he spoke to a gaggle of reporters. He claimed Shayla had endangered a VIP, broken rules, and cost him business with her reckless charity. He painted her as a thief, a liar, a woman who'd used Barron Trump for fame. The lies twisted tighter, accusing her of pocketing cash that night, of conspiring with the media. It was a public execution, a desperate bid to shift the blame and salvage his sinking ship. Shayla's stomach churned, her hands clenching as Maya watched, her young face hardening with anger. The apartment buzzed with tension that night. Mrs. Rodriguez stormed in, her voice sharp as she waved a newspaper with Peterson's smug face on it. "That man's a snake," she spat, slamming enchiladas onto the table. Maya scrolled social media, reading aloud the outrage. Hashtags like "Justice for Shayla" trending, people calling Peterson a coward. But the damage stung. Job applications she'd sent out weeks ago dried up completely. Old friends whispered behind her back, and photographers camped outside again. Shayla sat in the dark after Maya slept, the TV's glow flickering across her face as Peterson's words replayed. She'd faced storms before, losing her mama, raising Maya alone, but this felt personal, a knife aimed at her core. Her phone buzzed, cutting through the silence. It was Melania, her message short. "Saw the news, meet me tomorrow, we fight back." Shayla stared at the screen, her pulse racing. Fight back. She'd never been a fighter, not like this. But something shifted, a spark of defiance, a refusal to let Peterson win. She thought of Maya, of Barron, of the kind table taking shape in secret meetings. This wasn't just her battle anymore. The next day, she'd walk into that cafe with her head high, ready to turn the tables. Peterson had tried to destroy her, but he'd underestimated the storm she could summon, and the allies she'd gained along the way. Shayla Jackson woke to a morning thick with purpose, the air in her apartment sharp with the scent of coffee and resolve. Mr. Peterson's venomous press conference had lit a fuse, and the fallout burned through her world like wildfire. The TV still hummed with his accusations: thief, opportunist, rule breaker, each word a barbed arrow aimed at her heart. She spent the night wrestling with anger and doubt, her mama's prayer looping in her mind until it steadied her. Dawn brought clarity. She wouldn't cower. Melania's message glowed on her phone, a lifeline in the chaos, and Shayla dressed with care. Her Windsor uniform swapped for a simple black dress, her hair pulled back tight, her eyes fierce with a fire she hadn't known she possessed. Today, she'd meet the former First Lady and plot a counterstrike that would make Peterson choke on his lies. The cafe was quieter than before, its morning crowd thin, the hum of espresso machines a soft backdrop to the storm brewing inside her. Melania arrived like a vision, her coat a sweep of ivory against the drab walls, her presence commanding yet calm. She slid into the booth across from Shayla, her gaze steady, and wasted no time. Peterson's attack wasn't just personal, she explained. It was a desperate grasp at relevance as La Petite Bistro's reputation crumbled. Boycotts had slashed his business, regulars fleeing after the viral footage painted him as the villain who'd fired a heroine. But his lies had traction. Some believed them, and the media loved a scandal too much to let it die. "He wants to bury you," Melania said, her voice low, "but we'll bury him instead." The plan unfolded over steaming cups, a strategy as bold as it was meticulous. Melania had resources, connections, PR experts, a quiet army of influence built from years in the spotlight. She'd already spoken to Barron, who'd insisted on helping, his gratitude for Shayla unshaken by the chaos. They'd go public, but on their terms. No defensive interviews, no pleading. Shayla's story would shine through action, not words. The kind table, still a secret to most, would be their weapon. Melania proposed accelerating the project, announcing it as a partnership between them, a beacon of kindness rising from Peterson's ashes. They'd expose his lies with proof, receipts, timestamps, witness statements from that night, and let the public's outrage do the rest. Shayla listened, her hands steady now, her mind racing with the audacity of it all. Back home, the apartment became a war room. Maya sat cross-legged on the couch, her laptop open, her fingers flying as she dug through social media for every clip, every comment, every shred of support they could use. Mrs. Rodriguez bustled in with coffee and a stack of old La Petite Bistro receipts she'd kept. "Evidence," she declared, her eyes glinting with defiance. Mr. Chen arrived next, his arms full of fruit crates, his gruff voice offering to rally the neighborhood merchants who'd blacklisted Peterson's place. Shayla pored over her own records, pay stubs, tip logs, the crumpled $10 bill Barron had left that night, still tucked in her drawer. Melania's team faxed over security footage timestamps, proving she'd paid with her own cash, not stolen a dime. The truth was a fortress, and they were building it brick by brick. The announcement came 3 days later, a press release crafted with surgical precision. The Windsor Hotel hosted it, their grand ballroom packed with reporters, cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. Shayla stood beside Melania, her black dress swapped for a crisp blazer, her name tag gleaming as a badge of honor. Barron stood too, taller now, his cap gone, his presence a quiet testament to the night that started it all. Melania spoke first, her voice cutting through the buzz, unveiling the kind table, a restaurant born from Shayla's compassion, funded by her family's foundation, set to open on 7th Street in weeks. She praised Shayla's integrity, her refusal to exploit Barron's moment of vulnerability, and turned the spotlight on Peterson's baseless slander. Then Shayla stepped forward, her voice steady as she told her truth, not with anger but with dignity. She spoke of that night, of a boy needing refuge, of a manager's betrayal, of a firing that tried to break her. She held up the $10 bill, its creases worn from her grip, and the receipt she'd paid herself, her handwriting clear in the grainy photocopy flashed on a screen behind her. The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, then applause as the evidence sank in. Melania's team had seated the crowd with La Petite Bistro regulars, who stood one by one, their voices raw as they recounted Shayla's kindness over years, extra bread for a sick wife, a smile during a hard day. Peterson's lies unraveled in real time, the footage timestamps sealing his fate. Social media exploded, #kind table trending alongside Peterson lies, the public's fury turning on him like a tide. The fallout was swift and brutal. La Petite Bistro's Yelp page drowned in one-star reviews, its windows papered with boycott flyers by morning. Peterson tried a rebuttal, a stammering interview on a local station, but his excuses withered under scrutiny. Former staff leaked stories of his penny pinching, his temper, his disdain for charity cases. Customers vanished, suppliers cut ties, and within days, a for lease sign hung crookedly in the window. Shayla watched it unfold from the Windsor, her shifts a blur of guests who now tipped extra, whispering thanks for her courage. But the victory felt hollow without Maya's full understanding. That night, she sat her daughter down, the TV off, the apartment quiet save for the hum of the fridge. She told Maya everything: the Windsor job, Barron's letter, the check that saved the trip, the secret meetings with Melania. Maya listened, her eyes wide, then threw her arms around her mom, her voice thick with pride. "You're a superhero," she whispered, and Shayla laughed through tears, feeling the weight lift just a little. The Kind table's construction raced ahead, the 7th Street lot buzzing with workers, its frame rising like a promise against the skyline. Melania visited often, her elegance a contrast to the sawdust, her ideas sharpening Shayla's vision. They added a pay-what-you-can box, a nod to Shayla's mama, ensuring no one left hungry. Barron dropped by too, his college books under one arm, his suggestions, simple dishes, a kid's corner, woven into the plan. Peterson's humiliation peaked a week later, a viral video showing him chased from his own restaurant by protesters chanting Shayla's name. It was petty, it was loud, and it was glorious. Shayla didn't gloat, she didn't have to. The Kind table's soft opening loomed, a test run for staff and neighbors, and she threw herself into it. She hired James, a veteran with a limp and a gentle smile, and Maria, a single mom whose kids played with Maya on weekends. Tommy, their retired mailman, joined too, his hands steady as he polished the counter. The menu took shape, comfort food with a twist, recipes from her mama's kitchen mixed with Barron's favorites. The framed security footage hung by the door, its engraving, "Kindness changes everything," a quiet middle finger to Peterson's downfall. The soft opening arrived, a crisp evening with the smell of fresh paint and baking bread spilling into the street. Mrs. Rodriguez led a parade of neighbors, Mr. Chen trailing with flowers, their faces alight with pride. Melania and Barron slipped in late, no fanfare, just smiles as they took seats at the counter. Shayla worked the floor, her apron crisp, her voice warm as she greeted every guest, some paying full price, others dropping coins into the box, all eating together. Maya served too, her laughter ringing out as she chatted with kids her age, her graduation cap tucked under the counter like a trophy. The night was a blur of full plates and fuller hearts, a triumph Peterson could never touch. But as Shayla locked up, a shadow lingered, a question of how far this could go and what storms might still come. Shayla Jackson stood before the Kind table on its official opening day, the autumn breeze carrying the scent of fresh bread and possibility down 7th Street. The restaurant's windows gleamed in the morning light, gold letters spelling out, where kindness is always on the menu, in a curve that caught the sun just right. It was 6 months since that quiet Tuesday at La Petite Bistro, 6 months since she'd lost everything only to find something greater. The journey had been a whirlwind, firing, betrayal, a viral storm, a public showdown with Mr. Peterson, and a secret dream built with Melania Trump's unwavering faith. Now here it stood, a brick-and-mortar testament to her mama's wisdom, a place where kindness wasn't just a word but a way of life. She clutched the keys, her hands steady despite the butterflies in her chest, and felt the weight of it all, past, present, and a future she could hardly fathom. The soft opening had been a triumph, a warm-up that filled the space with neighbors and hope. Today was different, bigger, louder, a declaration to the world. Maya stood beside her, home from her first college semester, her eyes sparkling with the same excitement she'd worn at her 8th grade graduation. She insisted on being here, skipping a weekend of dorm life to cut the ribbon with her mom. "This is ours," she'd said, and Shayla had hugged her tight, marveling at the young woman she'd raised, sharp, kind, and fearless. The staff trickled in, their aprons crisp, their faces a kaleidoscope of stories, James with his veteran's limp, Maria juggling 2 kids and a smile, Tommy polishing the counter like it was his own. They'd been handpicked, not just for skill but for heart, each one a mirror of the struggles Shayla had faced and overcome. The street buzzed with anticipation as the clock ticked toward 9. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived first, her arthritis slowing her steps but not her spirit, leading a crowd of neighbors like a general marching to victory. Mr. Chen followed, his arms laden with a bouquet so big it nearly hid his face, his gruff voice softened by pride. Former La Petite Bistro regulars trickled in too, their loyalty shifting to this new haven, their stories of Shayla's small kindnesses now legend. Cameras flashed from the sidelines, reporters, bloggers, locals with phones, capturing the moment the mystery waitress turned her firing into a revolution. Melania and Barron arrived last, slipping through the back door with no fanfare, their presence a quiet anchor amid the chaos. Barron, taller now, carried a college textbook, his smile shy but genuine. Melania's elegance cut through the crowd, her eyes meeting Shayla's with a nod that said, "We did this." The ribbon cutting was simple but electric. Shayla held the oversized scissors, Maya's hand guiding hers, and the red fabric fell away to cheers that echoed down the block. The doors swung open and the first customers stepped inside. A group of teenagers, their clothes threadbare, their pockets empty, their eyes wide with nerves. Shayla greeted them herself, her voice warm as she led them to a sunny table by the window. "Breakfast on the house today," she said, "and tomorrow pay what you can." Their faces lit up, a mix of relief and wonder, and Maya brought them menus, chatting like they were old friends. It set the tone, everyone welcome, no one judged, a table for all. The morning unfurled in a blur of coffee cups and steaming plates, each hour weaving new threads into the tapestry of the day. A businessman in a pinstripe suit paid for his eggs and left cash for 10 more meals, his nod to Shayla silent but firm. A young mother with 3 kids hesitated at the pay-what-you-can box, her hands trembling as she dropped in a few coins. Maya explained the policy with a grin, and the woman's tears fell as she hugged her. 2 elderly sisters, their hair white as snow, took the bus across town after reading about the kind table in the paper, their voices quavering with thanks as they ate pancakes Shayla's mama used to make. The counter filled with regulars, Barron at his usual spot, now marked with a plaque reading "Where Kindness Began." No name attached, just a nod to that night. He sipped coffee, his textbook open, and told Shayla he'd almost skipped La Petite Bistro, too ashamed to walk in. "You made it feel safe," he said, and she squeezed his hand, her heart swelling at the ripple she'd started. Lunch brought a surprise that stopped Shayla cold. Mr. Peterson shuffled in, his suit wrinkled, his face a mask of defeat. The room hushed, heads turning as he approached the counter, an envelope clutched in his hand. He didn't meet her eyes, his voice low as he admitted he'd been wrong, wrong to fire her, wrong to lie, wrong to think he could outrun the truth. The envelope held a check, a donation to the Pay It Forward Fund, a peace offering too late to mend what he'd broken. Shayla took it, her fingers steady, her silence louder than any words. He left as quietly as he'd come, the door chiming behind him and the room exhaled. Some clapped, others whispered, but Shayla just turned back to her work. Revenge wasn't her style. Letting him live with his shame was enough. The afternoon stretched into a symphony of stories. A teacher brought her class, their eyes wide as they learned about the box, some paid with crumpled bills, others with promises to help later. A homeless man lingered outside, his coat patched, until James coaxed him in with a bowl of soup and a seat by the heater. Reporters circled, their questions sharp. How'd she fund it? Why Melania? What's next? But Shayla kept it simple. Kindness built this, and kindness keeps it going. Social media hummed, #KindTable trending worldwide, posts praising her triumph over Peterson's ruin. La Petite Bistro, for lease sign became a meme, a punchline to her comeback. Maya scrolled through it all, her laughter filling the kitchen as she prepped desserts, her college tailies weaving into the bustle. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the windows, Shayla gathered her team for a quiet moment before dinner service. They stood in a circle, staff, family, neighbors, hands linked as she spoke of her mama's wisdom. Kindness was bread, made fresh daily, shared with all, always enough. Maya added the rest, her voice clear. Every table's a chance to make the world bigger, kinder, and the group nodded, their faces a mosaic of belief. Dinner brought more families, workers, strangers drawn by the buzz, each plate a story, each coin in the box a vote for hope. A teenage boy slipped in late, his cap low, his shoulders slumped, and Shayla recognized that look, another soul needing refuge. She poured him water, asked about his day, and watched Maya serve him with the same care she'd learned by osmosis. The circle felt complete, an echo of that Tuesday night now multiplied 1,000-fold. Closing time came after midnight, the last guests lingering over coffee, their laughter a balm to Shayla's tired bones. She locked the doors, the street quiet now, the restaurant's glow a beacon against the dark. Maya slumped at the counter, her apron smudged with chocolate, her grin wide as she recounted the day, kids she'd fed, stories she'd heard, the way it felt like home. Melania and Barron lingered too, their coats on but their steps slow, as if reluctant to leave. "This is bigger than us," Melania said, her eyes sweeping the space, and Shayla nodded, feeling the truth of it in her marrow. Barron handed her a small gift, a wooden sign engraved with Mama's rule. Kindness costs nothing, but it's. She hugged him, tears pricking her eyes. The next months unfolded like a dream rooted in reality. The kind table thrived, its pay what you can model drawing crowds. Some paid double, others nothing, but the books balanced, the spirit soared. Shayla became a quiet icon, her face on magazine covers, her story taught in schools. Maya aced her first semester, her scholarship secure, her weekends spent helping at the restaurant, her laughter a constant. Melania's foundation poured in support, expanding the vision. Another kind table planned for Baltimore, then Philly, each with Shayla's stamp. Peterson faded, his name a footnote, his restaurant raised for condos. The neighborhood flourished, merchants thriving on the foot traffic, kids playing where despair once lingered. Years later, Shayla stood at Maya's college graduation, her daughter's cap tasseled with honors, her speech echoing that 8th grade day. "Kindness isn't just what you do, it's who you are." Barron sat in the crowd, a law student now, his nod to Shayla a silent thank you. Melania clapped beside him, her pride quiet but fierce. The kind table chain had grown, 10 locations, each a haven, each feeding thousands. Shayla still worked the DC floor, her apron worn, her smile unchanged, the framed footage by the door a relic of a night that changed the world. She faced Peterson's wrath, turned his humiliation into her triumph, and built a legacy from crumbs of kindness. As Maya hugged her, the crowd roaring, Shayla whispered her mama's prayer one last time, knowing she'd become the person her daughter and the world believed her to be. If you enjoyed this story, check out another video with an even more amazing tale. There's always something exciting waiting for you on our channel. And don't forget, more wonderful stories are coming soon. Hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our upcoming adventures.